Hi, my name is Bethany, and today I want to talk to you about neurodiversity. So a while ago, I made a video very briefly and lightly covering the concept and some of the terms around neurodiversity. It's a video called Neurodiversity in a Nutshell, and that was pretty much what it was supposed to be, right? A very quick overview and maybe a way to help people understand some terms that didn't really make sense to them that they may have seen being used. And recently it appears there's been an increase in interest in this, and one of the most common questions or types of feedback that I get is, why is this always so vague? And quite frankly, that's a good question. It's an answer I want to know too. Even when I'm thinking about neurodiversity, people are asking me, does this count? Does that count? And I've just gone off of what I've heard. I figured as long as it's considered a different kind of brain, therefore considered neurodivergent. And for those of you that I responded to without really looking into what constitutes as neurodivergent, I apologize, because I was just really going off of what I'd heard. But today I want to set the record straight, and let's take a better look at what neurodiversity is and what counts as neurodivergent. The term neurodiversity was first coined by someone named Judy Singer in a paper in 1998. At the time, this was applied nearly exclusively to autism. However, the concept of neurodiversity was derived from biodiversity, and this idea of a diversity of minds definitely lends to the idea of talking about more than just autism or not autism. This is exactly where the muddying of the waters begins. Technically, yes, every single person has a neurodiverse or neurodivergent brain, because no brain is exactly the same as another. However, that would be really oversimplifying the concept, because there is a different pattern of autistic brains, for example, versus non-autistic brains. And I've gone over a little bit of that before in a previous video. I'll try to remember to link that for you. Either way, this kind of begins with this concept that neurodiversity movement members are against the idea of a cure or a pathologizing of what is a naturally different brain. This also comes with the concept of demanding us to act normal or try to be as normal as possible, or basically like the majority, is wrong and unfair. Baron Cohen actually makes an interesting argument in one of his papers about how autism, yes, does apply as a disability, but doesn't really appear to match the criteria for a disorder. This idea would obviously fit well into the idea of neurodiversity. But as we've seen in recent time, I feel like especially, the concept of neurodiverse or neurodivergent has definitely been applied to a lot more things than just autism, not autism, etc. And when we're talking about understanding brains differently than we did before, of course, no one really wants to gatekeep who gets to belong in the neurodivergent group, especially when they feel that that has been kind of a thing that's been happening to autistic people. So to begin this, we're actually going to go over some different sources that list a bunch of things that they consider neurodivergent or imply are neurodivergent. Possibly one of the broadest lists is in an article by Jason Togaw, which was published on the Psychology Today website, and he lists these following conditions as part of neurodiversity, which would imply that they are considered to be neurodivergent: autism, epilepsy, Tourette's syndrome, mania, depression, hallucination, dyslexia, prosopagnosia, migraine, synesthesia, bipolar, schizophrenia, and psychosis. Now, clearly it's not intended to be an all-encompassing list, but clearly it is a pretty loose application of the concept of neurodiversity. And it does highlight a lot of conditions that other lists don't seem to typically. Another source, Different Brains, has a list where they kind of go over all the neurodivergent topics, etc., that they're aware of. So it kind of again implies that these would be considered neurodivergent, and this is what they list: ADHD, anxiety, apraxia, Asperger's syndrome, ASD or autism, Alzheimer's disease, bipolar, concussions, depression, Down syndrome, dyslexia, epilepsy, misophonia, obsessive compulsive disorder, Parkinson's disease, post-traumatic stress disorder, and Tourette's. Now keep in mind, they may not intend to imply that all of those are actually neurodivergent conditions, because a lot of these might co-occur with neurodivergent conditions. However, if you're someone looking to find out if you're considered neurodivergent, it would imply that if you are on that list, it's likely. Yet another source, Exceptional Individuals, lists some conditions that I believe are more commonly accepted as being neurodivergent: dyslexia, dyspraxia, autism, and ADHD. They also add some under other, as in other neurodivergent conditions, including Mears-Irland syndrome, hyperlexia, Tourette syndrome, OCD, and synesthesia. They add anxiety under related. So you might be like me, and you might hesitate to want to include something like depression or anxiety, which are mental illnesses and have very dire effects on individuals of any kind, to the list of brain differences to be celebrated. While many people who are neurodivergent do experience these things, that doesn't make depression or anxiety itself neurodivergent. And here's another thing that I'd like to say too, is arguably there isn't a real positive or strength to them. When we're looking at neurodivergent conditions, we often are fighting against pathologizing just what we consider to be a natural difference. However, you're always going to see a list of positives and negatives. A lot of times these positives aren't commonly seen, maybe not acknowledged a lot, especially when it comes to like autism. And they're like, oh well, you get stuck on this one task. We're like, well, hyperfocus can help us really get things done. So you see how that can be a positive and a negative. However, depression isn't, there's not really a strength to that. In fact, I really don't want to celebrate depression as a type of neurodivergence when it's taken the lives of so many autistic people. So thus, the question must be asked, what counts as neurodivergent? Does simply having a change in the brain cause someone to be neurodivergent? And if so, doesn't that have to include things like chronic depression? I came across an insightful post on Tumblr, of all places, that really gives insight into the concept of what probably would most be accurate to be considered neurodivergent versus a kind of condition or mental illness or disorder or whatever else. Feel free to check out their full post. As always with the other sources, I do have it linked in the description box. This post was specifically made to answer the question of whether DID or OSDD1 would be considered a neurodivergent condition. So they begin by pointing out that neurodiversity started in the autistic community and was definitely a thing bred of the autistic community specifically. They also note that the neurodiversity movement has a strong stance against things like cures and trying to treat or therapy-ize people into not being themselves anymore. Something they pointed out specifically here was that clearly depression is something that people should seek treatment for because it can endanger their life. So if it was considered part of neurodiversity, that doesn't make sense. It would conflict with the overall stance and the concept of neurodiversity. They also point out that most mental illnesses and conditions are not lifelong variations in neurotype. And then they make an argument that I think is very solid, in that conditions that are considered neurodivergent should really be those that are neurodevelopmental, or at least developmental in nature, meaning that they start from birth. This isn't something that is caused by an event. This isn't something that is just like a temporary thing. This is something that your body and your whole being was wired and existed this way from the moment you were born, and it is developing continuously as you grow, because your brain is developing as you get older, so that would be why. That would make it integral to how this person exists, perceives the world, interacts with the world, etc. Because of this, they argue that DID or OSDD1 isn't really neurodivergent, because it has to be caused by childhood trauma, and it can be treated. People can integrate. It is not a naturally occurring neurotype. And this gets confusing because clearly someone with DID or OSDD1 don't have a normally functioning or the average type of brain. Their brain has done a lot of magnificent things to try to protect them from something that happened to them before. So with the broad type of application of neurodiversity, it would seem that clearly different type of brain means neurodivergent. But since it's not a naturally occurring neurotype from developmental perspectives or from birth basically, then the argument is that it's actually not. And I've heard people with DID consider themselves neurodivergent, and so I thought, yeah, sure, that's accurate. But if we're really thinking about what neurodiversity actually is, if we're actually going to set a standard for what it means, then it really wouldn't be. And there's nothing wrong with someone who has DID integrating with this broad implication of everything that is different brain-wise must be celebrated and preserved, and there shouldn't be a cure for it, etc., has really gotten a lot of people to be against the concept of neurodiversity. Just like I said before, I'm not interested in celebrating depression as a type of neurodiversity. It's not. It's a mental illness, and you can get treated for it. Some people have to learn how to live with it, and that's okay, but I wouldn't want to be like, yay, depression, and I was like just made to have depression. That's not true. Mental illness is not the same thing as having autism or ADHD. And I think this is where some things get confused as well, is that people think that if you don't count it as neurodivergent, you think somehow that that person themselves shouldn't be celebrated or respected, etc. And that's not the case. People with depression, people with anxiety, people with all sorts of conditions, mental, physical, etc., can live productive, happy lives and be joyful and enjoy their lives, even though they have to manage different types of issues. That's not saying that they can't. That's not saying that they're not worth something. It's not saying that because they have a mental illness that makes them less than. And in that, it almost feels like people seem to have this ableist viewpoint of if it is not neurodivergent, that must mean that it's bad and that person is less than. And I would encourage you to challenge that concept. Something doesn't have to be neurodivergent for someone to be successful and happy with their lives. They can still be a wonderful, amazing person and participate in their life as fully as they can and have all sorts of mental illnesses. Getting help doesn't make someone less. So we're really talking about more than just a mental illness. We're talking about a full-on, from birth, difference in how the brain works. And I'd even argue there might be some requirement to there being a positive or good side to this. One of the things I feel strongly about with autism is that we have special or different negatives, but on the flip side, we have also very unique positives and unique abilities. And so I believe that just like with anybody else, we have negatives and positives that we have to deal with. Ours just look different than other people's. So to say that depression is neurodivergent doesn't make sense to me, because there really isn't a positive that I'm seeing coming from that. It is a mental illness. It is something that should be treated. So I definitely partly agree with the person who wrote the post responding about neurodivergence and DID/OSDD1 in the fact that things should be developmental in nature. So I'm going to show you a list of what is considered to be neurodevelopmental disorders, and this would probably be a more specific and accurate list of what is considered neurodivergent. NDDs comprise intellectual disability, ID, communication disorders, autism spectrum disorder, ASD, attention deficit/hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD, neurodevelopmental motor disorders, including tic disorders, and specific learning disorders. Now, the same paper that I got that definition from also makes a prediction that it's possible that schizophrenia and bipolar may be added to neurodevelopmental disorders. But of course, that is their prediction. That's obviously not something set in stone or what we see right now. So according to this, we can confirm that autism, ADHD, tic disorders like Tourette's, neurodevelopmental motor disorders, intellectual disability, communication disorders, and specific learning disorders would be considered neurodivergent. Specific learning disorders would be stuff like dysgraphia, dyslexia, dyscalculia, etc. Again, tentatively, this may end up including schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. This leads me to another question. Do we celebrate all neurodevelopmental disorders as a neurodivergence that we should let alone, leave it be, and be happy about? And I think this is a fair question that a lot of the autistic community doesn't like to hear asked, but I think it's fair to ask it. A lot of people who do follow neurodiversity want to say that if it's a neurodivergence, it's not actually a disability. I would say, arguably, it is a disability. Whether you feel that it's a disability due to the social model or the medical model, that's all up for debate for all sorts of reasons. In the current world that we live in, it is a disability. Most people will at least concede on the concept of it being a disability or these being disabilities in some way, whether that's because of the social model or the medical model. But I'd really like to know, what counts as something that you would want to celebrate? Because things like bipolar disorder, people, yes, could be really, really productive during times of mania, and not so much during times of depression or basically being on the other side of the pole, right? So yeah, you could argue that, but a lot of people work really hard to mediate that and temper it so that they don't have to live on swings of going this way and that way and this way and that way. I don't think it's wrong of them to want to be having a more stable experience in life, and a lot of people actually do manage to treat the symptoms of it for long bouts of time. So the question there is, if this becomes technically a part of neurodivergency, do we say there shouldn't be a cure or any treatment for it? Additionally, what about tic disorders? Tic disorders, obviously, we wouldn't want someone to be like, don't do that, or shame someone because they have tics. And of those things, I get that. We shouldn't treat people poorly because of different conditions, disorders, mental illnesses, or physical illnesses, whatever else. We shouldn't treat people poorly. We shouldn't say, hey, you should, reach this magical standard I just decided on, etc. However, is it wrong to treat at least symptoms of things? When we're talking about tics, some people's tics are so painful and can cause them actual physical harm over time, and there's just no relief for some people with constant ticking. Would it be wrong for them to undergo some of the different treatments that might fix or at least help alleviate some of their ticking? Maybe I'm wrong here, and maybe people are really, it's just a part of them, and that's how it is, and they wouldn't ever want to get rid of their tics, and that's fine. But what about the people who do? And this is a question even in the autism community. If there were ways to alleviate some of the worst, whether it's comorbidity or actual part of autism, if there were ways of relieving some of the worst things without necessarily taking someone's brain and rewiring it or making someone not them, would it be wrong to look for things that could help and aid people? These are questions that I think we should be allowed to ask. And I might get in trouble for this video because I know a lot of people are very adamant, how dare you ever mention this? I think someone tried to call me a curebee one time because of my video going over sketchy research talking about reversing autism. So, just asking the questions a lot of times can get people very angry. And I don't think that's fair because I am autistic. If I'm autistic, I should be allowed to ask the question of whether or not it's fair that we say that nobody can ever research things that could possibly be beneficial to us. I don't think that the concept of prevention as a cure, which has been very much looked into, is okay, because that is eugenics, deciding, oh, hey, that baby might have autism, want to get rid of them. Obviously horrible. But if there were a way to help balance some of the chemicals in the brain for some people who have autism in such a way that they do not want to have, Would that be wrong? And I don't know, maybe I'm just going off the deep end here, but I think it's a fair question to ask. And I think this is a fair question about neurodiversity as well. Yes, there is diversity, and I do believe that autism is simply a different way of your brain being. But I also have the luxury of being a subtype of autism that I don't have to rely on someone else to help me communicate. Does that make someone less than because they need someone there to help them communicate? No, that doesn't make them less. But I know some people who are non-speakers who wish they didn't have autism. Is it fair to keep therapies or things that could help them medically from them because we decided that we like our version of autism or our subset of autism? There are a lot of things I don't like about autism, but I know that it's a very integral part of my being. But for me, the positives can often outweigh the negatives. For some people, the negatives outweigh the positives, and we demonize people for having that conversation. So when it comes to neurodiversity, I'm a bit skeptical. People who are going so far to say depression and anxiety are parts of neurodiversity, I disagree. I don't think that even remotely makes sense. Nobody wants to gatekeep what gets to be neurodivergent, but right now, everybody and their dog is like, hey, I just found out I'm neurodivergent. And you know what? That's awesome. However, you might be being misled as to what that even means, and I didn't even realize what quite that meant. So if you're a person who likes to just like apply it to everything, you do you, but I personally am not going to be celebrating depression as a type of diversity to be respected, but I do view it as something that has threatened the lives of so many autistic people and my own, and I just don't see where we're gonna sit here and be like, oh, it's fine, like, let's not treat that. We can't have a stance on things like this, or even epilepsy. Epilepsy, people call that a neurodivergence. And I don't know what the positives of epilepsy are. It's one of the things that causes death in autistic people because it comes along a lot of times. So with the different wiring of our brains, a lot can accidentally go wrong, and we can have comorbid conditions, comorbidities, if you will. That doesn't make anyone better or worse than anyone else. But we have to ask ourselves, do we demonize people for a cure for all neurodivergent conditions? Or do we just demonize them for autism or ADHD or this other thing? Or like, it's very much cherry picking and very much just too much of a broad application. So my argument here is that neurodevelopmental disabilities are probably going to be exclusively what neurodivergence actually applies to if we're trying to say that this is a naturally occurring lifelong brain difference. And then I think we should also look into what parts we want to have that stance of no cure, no help, etc. Because if you're going to say that someone with epilepsy has a neurodivergence because they have epilepsy, and you want them to live their lives with seizures and never treat those seizures, I think that's really messed up. So really the heart of neurodiversity is to try to destigmatize and depathologize natural brain differences. And I think that's great. But there are some fair criticisms to it, and I do think that some people have taken it and run with it because nobody has really wanted to put borders or rules on what really counts as neurodivergence. So watching this video, did you find that you actually still are neurodivergent, or do you fall in a category of we're not sure, or just not mentioned at all, etc.? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below if you think I'm just being a jerk and saying like only autistic people can be neurodivergent, or if you agree that there are some valid concerns and criticisms. One of the topics I've gone over before, someone who is very critical of the neurodiversity movement mentioned a condition that has like nothing to do with anything that I've seen listed, and people didn't say like, hey, we don't actually count that as neurodiversity. Why is that? Is it because people are afraid of gatekeeping? Or do we just like not have a logical idea here? Like, was it a half-baked idea that we just let go? Like, I just want to know. And I think as people, we are allowed to engage in this conversation, and I'm giving you permission. I'm giving you permission to talk about it because I know a lot of other places you will not be liked for asking questions, and that's really silly because autistic people and neurodivergent people tend to like to ask questions. Anyway, let me know what you think. Also, if you didn't notice, yes, I'm wearing this hat. I'll probably be wearing various things with that on it. I just really liked it. So if you want to check out this design or others, I do have my merch store linked, and it may also be on the little carousel thing at the bottom of the video if you're watching on YouTube. If you enjoyed this video, found it informative, whatever else, you can go ahead and hit that like button. If you're interested in more autism related content from me, you can go ahead and hit that subscribe button. I try to upload every Thursday at 4 p.m. Central Standard Time, except for the last Thursday of the month where I try to go live with all of you. Thank you to everyone who supports me here on YouTube as YouTube members, my patrons over on Patreon, and a special thank you to my Spaz Tier patron, Philip Noah. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope that you have a wonderful day. Bye!